So lately I've been thinking a lot about the state of Nintendo, because the Switch is already coming up on its 7th anniversary, which to me is just insane, as I didn't think it was going to have a lifespan as long as this. I thought we'd already have the Switch 2 by now, but that just goes to show how successful this machine has been. It's brought Nintendo from the lowest of the lows to now their highest of highs. Because if you look at this chart that Jake made, it really puts into perspective just how bad of a place Nintendo is in from 2012 to the beginning of 2017. I remember all too well back then, people were basically saying that Nintendo was going the way of Sega. They're on a path to irrelevance, as Atari founder Nolan Bushnell said. But fast forward to now, and the opposite is true. Nintendo as a brand is stronger than ever. I have never seen Nintendo talked about as much as this generation. Not only from people in the gaming space, but from people who casually play games now and then. Heck, even people who don't play video games at all. Everyone knows about the Switch. Everyone is well aware of Nintendo as a company, as well as their quality games, and now movies and theme parks. It's led me to believe that we are officially in the golden age of Nintendo. Now, some of you might be thinking, what are you talking about, Joey? The golden age of Nintendo was back during the NES days or the Super NES days, and I just have to ask you to take nostalgia completely out of the equation. Really think about this. Yes, the Nintendo Entertainment System was popular, and it was very important in bringing video games back from their crash that Atari left them in, but back then, Nintendo didn't really have competition. Sure, there were other hardware manufacturers, but they weren't nearly as big as Nintendo was. And you also have to consider that gaming in general wasn't as widely accepted as it is now. Video games were largely considered children's toys. And I was not around during that time, but I'm pretty sure that parents were not as big on the idea of video games as they are today. A lot of them touted the rhetoric of, oh, these things will rot your brain or whatever. And I know that there are some parents who still think that today, but not nearly as many as back in the 80s and early 90s. Now in this era, those 80s and 90s kids grew up, and a lot of them have not left the hobby. They're still playing video games, which is what makes it more widely accepted now. And you might also argue that Nintendo's golden age was during the Wii era. Everybody was going crazy for that system. You couldn't find any of them in stores for years. And while that may be true, the Wii still felt largely like a gimmick, and it kind of was. Don't get me wrong, there are so many great games on that system that I go back to every now and then, but I want to say that a lot of people bought the Wii, played Wii Sports for 1 or 2 sessions, and then mainly left it collecting dust until the next family gathering. That's what I noticed in quite a few of my own family households, and I think that was the case for a lot of households around the world. And I don't know if this is because of the people I hung out with in middle and high school, but from my perspective, people were not viewing the Wii as favorably as the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. And while yes, better graphics don't mean better game, I can't blame anyone for looking at the Wii 360 and PS3 side by side and automatically think the Wii was a less impressive machine, mainly with its focus on motion controls. As the Wii's years went on, people were getting tired of that gimmick, especially when Skyward Sword was announced and it was built all around motion controls, and even though I love that game now, I remember not being eager to pick up that game at all during release because of that over-reliance on motion controls. So yeah, even though the Wii sold a lot, it didn't really have that staying power. And if we look back at Nintendo's console history, their best-selling platforms other than the Wii were handhelds, with the Nintendo DS being the second best-selling game console of all time. And in that sense, the Switch merging console and handheld was the best decision Nintendo could have made. You could say that the handheld gimmick was actually a useful one and has longevity even in a world dominated by smartphones. Because let's face it, even though the 3DS did very well for itself, it still didn't do nearly as good as the Nintendo DS, partly because smartphones just came into the picture and took away a lot of the need for people to have handheld gaming devices. But the Switch was powerful enough that it could have console-quality games that smartphones couldn't even dream of running. Of course, phones are now getting way more powerful and are able to run games like Resident Evil and Assassin's Creed, but this was not the case in 2017, because your phone was not able to run games like Breath of the Wild, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, heck, even Doom and Skyrim. The Switch was not an ordinary handheld at this time, as it was capable of running those home console quality games, albeit with some compromises, but they were worth it just to be able to play in handheld mode. The Switch sold so well over the years that it eventually became the number 3 best-selling console of all time. So I wouldn't just say the Switch was the ultimate bounce back, not just from the failure that was the Wii U, but honestly from most of Nintendo's consoles. Because as much as we may love those older Nintendo consoles like the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube, there was always something holding those consoles back from becoming successful. The Nintendo 64 had a weirdo controller and was still using cartridges when the other console manufacturers switched to discs. Not only that, but the GameCube, as much as we love this thing, was far from a sales success, partly because of those strange tiny discs. Nintendo struck a winning formula with the Switch, and now you have so many more people playing on a Nintendo platform than ever before. I mean, the Switch has yet to outsell the Nintendo DS, but the DS did not have smartphones to compete with back when it came out, so the Switch getting just below it is even more impressive. But you don't become the third best-selling game console without a set of quality games, and the Switch doesn't only have quality games, it also has a huge quantity of them. There were also hardly any large gaps between releases. It seems like every month, nay week, there was something great to play on the Nintendo Switch. We already know that the games themselves are great, but what I think what's more important is that through the success of the Switch, Nintendo brought back quite a few of their dormant franchises, such as Metroid with Dread and eventually Prime 4 whenever that comes out. But then Pikmin 4 finally came out on the Switch, with the previous 3 being re-released for it. And who would have thought that F-Zero would have ever come back? Sure, it's not a mainline F-Zero game, but F-Zero 99 is a fantastic battle royale experience, and it's brought more eyes on the franchise than ever before. And I gotta give a shout out to Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. We have not seen this franchise in so long, and even though the circumstances surrounding this release have not been the best, it's still great to see Nintendo give it another chance. And there's no mistaking that the quality of these games are unreal, and their sales reflect that. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are the best-selling Zelda games by a large margin. Not only that, but Super Mario Bros. Wonder had the best launch of any Mario game to date. Metroid Dread also became the best-selling Metroid game, and let's not forget that when Kirby went 3D with the Forgotten Land, it became the best-selling Kirby game of all time. This is what we call the Switch effect, and so many Nintendo franchises have benefited from this. And putting aside the new games, the Switch also has ways to revisit the classics through the Nintendo Switch game library, along with various re-releases such as Super Mario RPG, Metroid Prime Remastered, Skyward Sword HD, and the upcoming Thousand Year Door remake. The biggest strength of the Nintendo Switch's library is that it's diverse, with various genres and franchises for anyone to sink their teeth into. But what really makes this the golden age of Nintendo is not just the hardware and the software, it's everything beyond that. Nintendo's IP are no longer becoming restricted to mainly games. For example, the Super Nintendo World theme parks located in Universal Studios Japan and Hollywood. Attendees actually feel like they're in the Mushroom Kingdom through the high-quality backdrops and animatronics. What's more is that it's going to be expanding with a new Donkey Kong attraction. Who's to say there won't be more room for growth in the coming years? But more importantly than that, there's the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Nintendo's first venture into cinema since the last Super Mario Bros. Movie was a complete disaster 30 years ago. And of course, this movie had the opposite outcome, making over $1 billion at the box office, and Nintendo even credits the movie for the success of Super Mario Bros. Wonder, as well as sales of other evergreen Mario titles. Of course, Nintendo liked what they saw with the Mario movie, and at the end of the year announced a live-action Zelda movie to be in development. How can you see all of this and not think that we are in the golden age of Nintendo? Their games are great, their hardware is great, and their non-gaming ventures such as their movies and theme parks are off to a great start. As I said before, Nintendo's brand is growing, and it's doing it fast. All the while, the products they put out are being met with glowing reception. That said, how long will this golden age last? That answer is simple. It'll last as long as Nintendo keeps making great decisions that keep people happy and engaged. That means not releasing another console as bad as the Wii U. But even if they did release a console that flopped, they're in a much better position now than they were at the end of the Wii's life, where they'll eventually bounce back. There may come a low point in Nintendo's future again, but I don't think they'll ever be in a position as bad as the one they were in during the Wii U era. Because let's face it, after the Switch era, Nintendo really is just too big to fail. But you know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there will be a time in the future when Nintendo just makes string after string of bad decisions and they eventually go bankrupt. But honestly, my intuition tells me after these past few years that they're going to be okay for a while. And I believe that because of their strong software lineup, their undefeatable hardware, and their successful foray into non-gaming ventures, there is no better time to be a Nintendo fan than here in this golden age. It'll be very interesting to see what they do in 2024. Will we find out what their successor to the Nintendo Switch is? Will it be as successful as the current Switch? Only time will tell, and I don't think we have much longer to wait. But I want to hear from you. Do you think we're in Nintendo's golden age? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, bye-bye.